So good morning, everyone. I'm Kay Hall from the UK Squirrel Accord Partnership. Happy Red Squirrel Awareness Week and happy autumn equinox for today. Autumn's certainly a busy time of year for our red squirrels as they collect up and cache various seasonal nuts and seeds to see them through the winter months. Welcome to this, our second Red Squirrel Conservation Update webinar. Our fabulous speakers from last year have returned to join us today to tell us what's been happening in the red squirrel world across the different countries. In geographical order from north to south, we look forward to hearing from Scotland's Mel Tonkin, Northern Ireland's Katy Bell, England's Stephen Trotter, and Wales' Craig Shuttleworth. We'll start with the presentations and move on to a question and answer session afterwards. So if you wish to ask our speakers any questions, please use the Q&A section of the Zoom facilities. You can use the chat function to say hello, pass on comments or talk between each other, but try to keep any questions for the Q&A session in that Q&A function so I can keep track of them mainly, and we'll try to get through them all at the end. So I'll now pass on to our first speaker, Mel Tonkin from Scotland. So if everyone else can just mute themselves and turn their videos off, that would be great. Brilliant. Thanks, Mel.
Is that shared successfully?
Yeah, that looks great.
Right, okay. So I thought I'd give a little snapshot. So much has happened. So we'll just give a very quick whiz through what's been going on over the past year or so. Okay, why doesn't it page down? This is slightly worrying. All right, okay, we've done it. Just a little bit about what's going to be in the talk. I'll give a bit of background for those people who are not familiar with the project, just so you know what I'm talking about. I'll go on to talk a little bit about the impacts that COVID has had, because they have been quite, they've affected our targets quite seriously in many ways. But then I'll go on to have a look at the achievements, both in terms of the ecological achievements and some of the community development. A quick look at some current events, some of which are going on probably as we speak, and then finally what's coming next. So we're now in the 5th year of a 5-year Heritage Lottery funded project. There are our lovely partners along the top. We've called it Developing Community Action, and we're kind of, although we've always done coordinated strategic landscape scale grey squirrel control since we started up in 2009, this 5-year stretch, the lottery funded stretch, is really about trying to increase our volunteer cooperation and delivery of grey squirrel control and other red squirrel protection measures, but particularly to establish a series of independent groups, volunteer groups in the south of Scotland, which we've always found very difficult to fund for. And so it feels sensible to have a backup for when we haven't got funding in place. So just a quick coverage of the strategic aims of the Grey Squirrel Control Programme. I mean, the main aim really is to protect this very big red-only area that's over the northern part of Scotland, the Highlands, Grampian, into Argyll and up into the western Scotland along the west coast there. There are 2 elements to this. One is the attempted eradication of this isolated population around Aberdeen. So that's a containment exercise for Aberdeen and eventually, hopefully, an eradication. Secondly, there's a containment of grey squirrels along the Highland Line, which is a landscape fault line, which helps us to target our control more effectively than if we just had a lovely landscape where grey squirrels could gallivant freely. So the idea there is to prevent any further incursion of grey squirrels beyond where they are now, and to mop up any grey squirrels that happen to pop up to the north of that line. And then finally, in the south, we have decided, there's still a very big red squirrel population. You can see where it's red or purple, that's where red squirrels are. So it's still, a good lot of red squirrels across the south. So what we're doing there is we've chosen particular landscapes to reduce grey squirrel density so that they can't replace red squirrels everywhere. And that's been, those areas have been really the main focus of this phase of the project. So having a quick look, here are these 10 areas we've got across the south. They range from tiny little areas, the Berwickshire, Lower Berwickshire priority area for red squirrel conservation, or park as we're calling them, is really there to, as a sort of backstop, it's to protect the Northern England reserve, I think it's Kylo on the coast there, from grey squirrels drifting down from Scotland. So that's largely manned by the amazing Berwick Save Our Squirrels volunteer group that was set up actually before the beginning of this part of the project. But there are also some very big areas. I mean, these areas are like 50 kilometers across. I mean, they're maybe not 50, but 30 kilometers across and 50 long. I mean, they are huge areas. We have another couple of little backstop areas. One is the Cree Machars. Grey squirrels drift eastwards in this case into Dumfries and Galloway from Ayrshire, and this is the Cree Valley. So we're just patrolling the Cree Valley. Not many grey squirrels in there, but at least we can head them off before they become established further to the east. And there's also a bit of a population down here in the Machars Peninsula, this sort of peninsula, that we're trying to head off as well before they can get any worse. And the loose really is focused on Stranraer, where there's a massive population of grey squirrels in just one person's estate. I think we've had a good go at this year, but again, it's really to stop this coastal drift of South Ayrshire grey squirrels from moving around the corner and then drifting across into Dumfries. So we're really looking at these big areas are the ones that we're desperately trying to protect. No squirrels in this blank area, no red squirrels, no imported squirrel in this area of the Scottish borders. So we've just had to focus where we've got red squirrels to protect. So having a quick look at the COVID lockdown, I'm sure it's affected everybody, but obviously there's an immediate suspension of all volunteer fieldwork, which lasted several months. I think it was, went from, I think it says here, the 24th of March, right through until some point in August. So most of the key summer months for trapping grey squirrels were missed. And of course, all the public events and so forth that would happen over the summer also missed. So when you're trying to deliver community action, that's quite a big dent in what we were able to do. We had to cancel our 2 spring surveys, which is from 2020 and this year, both because of lockdowns that were in progress at the time. And that's really disappointing because we've had a run of these surveys, a run of data from 2011, and it's building up a really useful picture, and we've had a 2-year interruption. And the likelihood is we won't pick it up for a while either. It'll be up to somebody else to run these surveys in the future, I imagine, and not as often as every year. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of our face-to-face events were cancelled, sort of public talks and fairs and shows, and even things like meetings of volunteer groups. These all had to be cancelled. So we've actually had to develop other ways of delivering quite a lot of this stuff digitally. So we've taken up things like the webinars and so forth. So that's it's probably been good for us. It's given us another set of things that we can use, that we don't actually have to go out to everybody in person. But we still miss that, and you miss being able to see any old member of the public that happens to wander past, whereas these kind of events are very targeted and focused. But one of the big impacts really has been the immediate suspension of staff trapping, right from the start of the lockdown through to, we managed to get people out on the 1st of June, and we've managed to keep our staff out there trapping throughout, apart from a couple of people who had children who they had to educate at home. So there were additional issues. But the timing of this was absolutely disastrous. I don't know what it's been like in the rest of the UK, but the beech crop in 2019's autumn was absolutely massive. This is not a picture of it, that's just an ordinary beech crop, but we had an absolutely massive beech crop. And squirrels went into the winter already breeding and bred through the winter, not in huge numbers, but of course many more of them were ready to breed and come the breeding season. And normally, we would start trapping in March and April, and that would be our key time to interrupt that breeding, the production of young. But we were unable to do it this year. So, you know, we would have hoped to have headed that off and prevented it from becoming an issue. But we really, you know, we just weren't able to. So, you know, it has had its ramifications, as you'll see as we go through the rest of these slides. On the plus side, you know, with everybody in lockdown and encouraged to go out and take their daily exercise, we encouraged people to report squirrels while they were at it. And we had an absolutely massive increase in the sightings reported. I don't know if you can see the scale here, but I would say red and grey squirrels combined, we're probably usually getting about 8,000 sightings through the website a year. Looks similar this year. Last year, over 20,000 just through the website. You know, huge, and you'll see the map that came out of that later on. Oh look, my slide is covered up from on my screen here. Let's try and move that up. So what have we been doing? Well, despite everything, we have continued the squeeze on Aberdeen. So this is the previous year, 2019. You know, we're still trapping right along the Dee side here. This is the River Dee. Not having to do that this year. So, but you can also see from the darker colours more squirrels being caught. These are grey squirrel culls. And the darker colours, you know, we were catching a lot more grey squirrels actually within Aberdeen this year. But we also had these rather annoying outliers that we have to then chase up. You know, we do have a really good system. Well, first of all, we have the sightings, which have been brilliant for flagging up that there are grey squirrels in odd places. But we also have a very intensive system of monitoring that goes on all the time. Volunteers monitor feeder boxes well, it depends on when we last saw squirrels at them, grey squirrels at them, but it might be every 2 weeks, or it might be every month or once a quarter or something. And it's only when grey squirrels are detected that we need to send somebody in the team out to go and do the control. But you know, it's taking them away from their work within Aberdeen. They're having to shuttle their Aberdeen traps and go out and do some control. So we've got mink police involved in that as well. So we've tried to make it as efficient as we can. And when you look at the actual trapping effort and returns in terms of grey squirrels caught, it's ridiculous. You know, I think we caught 2 grey squirrels in like 1 day's trapping. So yeah, that's unusual. But you know, it still it enables us to trap much more in a much more focused way. Now I've put a big red arrow here to remind me to talk about this. One of the disappointing and sort of alarming increases of grey squirrel range has happened here in the south of Aberdeenshire. We've seen these grey squirrels gradually moving actually right from the south of Angus, which is, you know, way off the bottom of the screen, over the years towards the Highland Line. Well, actually the Highland Line runs, I don't know if you can see my pointer, along the edge of this forest, but we happened to decide we wanted them to stop at the actual local authority boundary, which is based on a river, River North Esk. So we know that they've been there in increasing numbers, and we've stepped up our control on that side of the border. But this year we've had control on the north side of the border, and that's 2020 I'm talking about here. 2021 likewise, we've caught more grey squirrels, probably about as far north as this one, which is a place called Benham on the coast there. Now that's worrying. This stretch of countryside between Aberdeen and the border is about maybe 50 kilometers. And it's really important that we keep that grey free. You know, these two populations are a different genetic stock. They've never intermingled, and we really want to keep it that way. Particularly the squirrel pox spreads throughout the lowland grey squirrel population, which it's doing very slowly, surprisingly slowly, but it presumably will do eventually. We really need to keep it out of that big highland population of red squirrels, because it will make a bit of a dent if grey squirrels have that in their armory to help them take over areas occupied by red squirrels. So next, oh, here we are. So here's the Highland Line. this time I've put the trapping that we did in the first year of this 5-year phase and last year. And they're really not that different, the whereabouts of the trapping. They're along this line, which is that we're calling the Highland Line, and the 10-kilometre, the purple is a 10 kilometres of buffer zone to the south of the line. And we're focusing most of the trapping in there, apart from some volunteers who insist on trapping around Dundee and various other places in the south there. That's fine, we're happy for them to do that. We could do with more volunteer trapping along this coastal area. So, you know, we've always had to go north of the line to mop up these odd grey squirrels, and it is just odd ones, fortunately. And you know, we're preventing the build-up of populations that used to be further to the north of the line when we first started this project in 2009. Unfortunately, this year, courtesy, I think, of the pandemic lockdown, we've had a couple of sightings here from Pitlochry and here Aberfeldy. Now, these are areas that we previously cleared, you know, some time ago, and we haven't had grey squirrels there since the beginning of the project, you know, this 5-year phase of the project. So it's kind of annoying that they've got that far up. Again, nothing in between. So I'm not quite sure what happens there. Do they carry on going and just not stop because they're not finding any other grey squirrels to set up a population with? I don't really know. We managed to get one of these Pitlochry grey squirrels, and I think we're still trapping there. I think we've had another sighting there this year, and I think we've had some recent sightings from the Aberfeldy area too, which is a bit worrying. So, you know, it's set us back. It's not disaster, any of this. You know, if we can continue to trap, which is, you know, a different question. If we can manage to continue to trap, then it shouldn't be something that we can't get hold of again. But it has set us back. There's no doubt about that. Now, looking at the South Scotland area where we've been trying to set up these networks of volunteers. Now, underneath this in the blue, you'll see our priority areas, our parks. And on top of that, in the hatched red, is where we now have the footprint of our current volunteer group. So this massive one of the Save Our Squirrels from Berwick. They cover a huge area, as I say, from Kyloe Reserve right to you know, right into Berwickshire. A couple of areas not picked up yet, but probably not disastrous either. You know, the north of this Nithsdale, which is a big, huge valley, where we have a lot of grey squirrels down the southern end. But now we have 18 groups who are up and running. Some of them are pretty much self-sufficient. You know, they've not been up and running for that long, but you know, all credit to them. A lot of groups have really been, you know, taken the bull by the horns and really got on with being self-sufficient. But we've got a couple of new groups dotted about that will still need a little bit more support to get going. So we have a couple of things in the progress. We're hoping that we will still have support staff in the south. I'll come back to this hope business at the end. But there's also an umbrella body for the groups in the south called Red Squirrel Forum for South Scotland, and they have been doing a great job of helping spread best practice and advice and even training between groups. So, you know, long may that continue. It's been a boon, and well done to them. It's been, you know, a great step forward. Looking at grey squirrels culled in the south, again, I thought I'd look where we were in 2017. So we did have control already in Berwickshire, courtesy of a volunteer group there, in the Teviot and Rule Park, courtesy of our grey squirrel officer, who mostly patrolled along the River Teviot along here. This is the Tweed, where we still have red squirrels in the presence of pine martens, which is interesting. So it felt like a really good place to, you know, to help the pine martens keep on top of the grey squirrels. Again, we have a grey squirrel officer there, and a grey squirrel officer that's picking up really oddments of grey squirrels in this big area of the Annandale, which is a big wide river catchment. You know, so it's a lowland landscape really. And a little bit of work also, this will be a landowner on forestry grant scheme at Thornhill in Nithsdale. Come the end of 2020, we've still got control going on in all those areas. Much more, unfortunately, in Annandale because of this increase in grey squirrels that we've seen as a result of the lockdown interruption of control. So yeah, just a lot more grey squirrels in the area being detected and caught. A lot more work in Nithsdale, partly because of our new grey squirrel officer there, but also we have 2 new groups that cover this area. Some grey squirrel control in the really key areas on the Dumfries side of this Solway Forest Park here. A little bit more coverage of the Glen Kens Valley. This is the Cree Valley, if anybody knows that area. That's sort of fairly famous. Kendee Marshes, RSPB Reserve along there. And we've now got control going along in this Cree Machers one and Luce. So we've got our areas with the necessary grey squirrel control going on. So we're really pleased that we've been able to do this. And if we have a look at some of the numbers in this is looking at all the control that we've got records for anyway, which is not all of it by any means. Not all volunteers can give us their control records. And it's not all forestry grant scheme records are available to us either. But just looking at this, I've split it into those 3 types of records, but just looking at the overall numbers. In 2017, we were able to control about 5,000, nearly 5,000 grey squirrels. By 2020, that's up to 8,000, which is going to be a combination of increased effort and just increased numbers of grey squirrels in that particular year. But it has been rising slowly throughout the project phase. And what you can see here is that landowners under forestry grant scheme are culling consistently the most grey squirrels. They're obviously spread out over very large landscapes and are able to cover between them. I think there's probably something like about, I can't remember the exact number, 88 or 90 landowners that we work with. Between them, they're covering quite large landscapes. So it's not surprising they are able to take the most squirrels. But even so, our grey squirrel officers have increased their take over the years. But most gratifyingly of all, really, is the increase in the volunteer output. So they start off, what's that, maybe culling maybe 300, 350 grey squirrels in year 1, increasing gradually until 2,500, more than 2,500 in 2020. So and they've overtaken the grey squirrel officers. So that's a really nice graph to show how well our volunteers have been going and the success of that initiative. Just a quick look at how red squirrel distributions are going, because that really is what this is all about. An interesting side effect of this amazing beech crop that we had that's given a boost to grey squirrel populations is it also happened to give a boost to red squirrel populations. They've also been a lot more numerous actually this year as well. But you can see that as far as we can tell from these 2 distribution maps, which take into account all our sightings records, our monitoring and our control data. Red squirrels are still pretty much in the areas where they used to be. In fact, because we had so many more records, whatever it was, 8,000 odd in 2017, 20,000 in 2020, we've filled in a lot of the areas, and so it looks as though red squirrels are doing a lot better in some places than they were before. But it's probably just that we've just got better recording in that particular year. So, but the main message, the take-home message, are that red squirrels are still doing pretty well in Scotland, and what we're doing seems to be enough to hold the population stable for now, even in a quite challenging year. So just looking at some of our digital output, we've had to take our public engagement onto the digital platforms, which is a bit of a learning process for everybody. So obviously we've been delivering, for instance, training via things like this, so webinars via Zoom and Teams. We've recently launched our digital guided walks through the My Dear Adventure app, which is great. Because one of the things we found, this is something that we will continue to use, hopefully. One of the things we found before lockdown is that very few people, or at least it was very unreliable to have guided walks in person. It really depended so much on weather and what other people had to do at the weekend and all this kind of thing. So having it on a app that people can use whenever they are available is a great thing. So there are step-by-step guides, and you're pointed every step of the way which way to go. So it's good fun. Try it out if you're in Scotland and near any of our trails. At the moment, we've got the Great Scottish Squirrel Survey going on, where we're encouraging everybody in Scotland to go out and just record whatever squirrels they see and to try and sort of pick them up in new areas where they don't normally go. And on the left, there's the list of events that we're running. Some of those are Facebook live streams or webinars. Oh, I noticed one of them is this webinar. So, but we are also running some outdoor events this year, so which is nice, to be able to run some outdoor things. So it'd be nice to be able to report back and see how they have gone at the end of the week. So last year in this Great Scottish Squirrel Survey Week, we got over 2,000 people taking part, which is great, and we're hoping for more this year. That would be fabulous if we got more people out. 2,500 and more red squirrel sightings and 5,000. So it was around about 5,548, 550 odd grey squirrel sightings. So we're talking about around about 3,000, slightly more sightings reported in a week. Now, back in the old days, when I used to run the Scottish Squirrel Survey with all the razzmatazz that we had then, I would maybe get 4,000 sightings reported in a year. So getting 3,000 in a week is amazing. It really does allow you to have a bit of a snapshot of how things are looking across the country. And then towards the end of the year, in December, Friday the 3rd, Saturday the 4th, we are holding our knowledge fair, which is the equivalent of the RSU knowledge fairs. We're holding that via the CrowdComms platform. So again, a virtual event, which will be interesting. But there'll be talks and workshops and networking opportunities and virtual exhibitions. So it should be fun. And some of you will already have your invitation. There's still more invitations to go out. So really looking forward to that. So that should be quite interesting to explore the new capabilities of these platforms. And just coming to a little bit about what happens next. We don't know where the squirrel is going to land, really. We've been holding talks with partners about the next phase of this project for probably over a year now, and we still are waiting on the partners' decisions on what funding contributions they're going to be able to bring forward, which in turn are dependent on Scottish Government's biodiversity priorities, which appear to be waiting for the end of the COP26 meeting that will take place in November, I think, in Glasgow, where the government is waiting to see what additional commitments they will have signed up to by then, and what their priorities will need to be in terms of climate change and biodiversity. So it's getting towards the end of the project. It finishes now in the end of March next year, and so we're all on tenterhooks waiting to see what happens next. The most likely scenario is that we'll have a 1 or 2 year kind of interim project with partner funding and whatever other funding we can pull together to take us through the first year. We do have some funding in place already, so there is certainly some work that we can do, but it's it's pretty critical. And the trust, the Scottish Wildlife Trust, at the moment is not in the state where after the COVID and the impacts of that, they're not in a state where they're looking to take too much financial risk, which they always have done in the past. So plus everybody's priorities are moving towards ecosystem conservation rather than individual species. But this is such a flagship project for the trust. I can't picture it, the trust letting it drop. But realities maybe that might be. We won't let the whole thing drop. We won't. But what we can deliver at this point is really very precarious. We don't know. In the future, though, what we'd really like to do with the next phase of the project, actually, if we do get a 1 or 2 year phase, is try and work out how we can embed grey squirrel control in particular in the ordinary work of other agencies, so that we're not so dependent on these funding rounds, because we've been doing this since 2009, where we've had 2 or 3 and this time 5 years, which is a bit of a luxury, funding rounds, where everybody's job is in jeopardy towards the end of each round. And I've been through that a lot of times, and I know what it's like for the staff. And so I'm really hoping that we can somehow move this grey squirrel control, which is necessary to keep it going, onto a much more secure footing if we can. Any ideas anybody has about how we do that, I would love to hear. And so thank you to our partners and our funders, and to you all for listening, and hopefully you'll have questions. I thought I was going to have to leave. I should probably just say that to Kay. I thought I might have to leave at this point, but it looks like I'm going to be able to stay with the webinar, so I'll hope to answer your questions later on. So I'm going to stop sharing just now.
Thanks very much, Mel. Certainly a lot of positive work going on through the Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels project, despite the challenges of the last 18 months that I think a lot of us have felt. So we'll now go on to Katy Bell of Northern Ireland.
Hello. Good morning. I was
Just make sure you're all right.
Yeah, 2 seconds. Okay.
Yeah,
you see that okay?
Yeah,
Perfect.
that looks great. Thanks, Katy.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. It's strange talking when you can't really see anyone, but I know you're all there. So, hello. Yeah, I'm coming to you from Northern Ireland. So, I work for Ulster Wildlife. We are part of the Wildlife Trusts here. We cover the whole of Northern Ireland, and I work as Senior Conservation Officer. So I have the pleasure of managing our species projects, and some habitat work as well. So that includes barn owls, hedgehogs, and of course our wonderful red squirrels. So we kind of have 2 strands to our charity, Landscapes and Seas. So I work under landscapes. So our red squirrel work, over the past few years, we've been part of the RSU project, huge big project. We had loads of staff. Then the funding then ended. We got some more funding to continue that, and Michael Stinson was our Red Squirrel Conservation Officer. Fortunately, that funding ended in March, so it's just been me since then. So that's been an added challenge, as well as COVID, for our red squirrel work. But we've just got funding for a species officer to join us. They'll be starting hopefully in November for the next 2 years, so we'll be able to get more of our kind of work going on the ground. So yeah, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing, and then a little bit about the future. So I think last year I kind of mentioned this, is just to get a bit of an overview about, if anyone kind of doesn't know, how our greys and reds are doing in Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole. So we were part of the All Ireland Squirrel and Piping Marten survey in 2019, and it just kind of showed us some interesting things. So you can just get a rough idea there about our squirrels, and actually our reds aren't doing too badly in the grand scheme of things in Ireland, and our grey squirrels are still a huge problem, still all over the place, but seem to be declining a bit, and a lot of them are more kind of focused in our big urban areas, in our urban population like Dublin and Belfast. That just gives you a bit of an idea about Ireland. So in 2020, we got back out to survey. So COVID had a big impact on this, but we've been since 2014 in Northern Ireland. There's been surveys monitoring our red squirrels, grey squirrels and pine martens. And doing that, we use camera traps and feeders. So 2020 was a bit different. We didn't have the same kind of, you know, a lot of the forests were closed because of the lockdown, and we didn't have, you know, a lot of people couldn't get out and do it, but we did what we could. Luckily that year, we also were able to partner with Dr. Josh Twining, who was doing work for British Ecological Society. So we combined our data and we were able to cover more sites. So that work has all been finished for 2020, and we were able to kind of monitor those 3 species. And I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of what we found from those 3 species, but the reports are all on our website if anyone's interested in looking at those more. So we have been surveying since, as I said, 2014, but Ulster Wildlife have been doing this on our own since 2017. So we have 4 years of data. So what we decided to do was combine those 4 years of data and kind of look at, from our presence absence surveys, where are our red squirrels, greys and our pine martens. So we worked with Dr. Caroline Finlay on this, and here are some of our maps. So this is our red squirrels, and the darker colours are squirrels that were found 3 years. The orange ones are 2 and the yellow are 1. So this just gives you a bit of an idea. Now, it's quite positive for us. You know, our red squirrels are doing pretty well. You can see from Fermanagh here, it's one of the strongholds in the country. But again, we have this kind of big vacuum in the middle here, which is kind of grey country a bit, but it also was a bit of a gap in our surveying. So some of this, because it's not surveyed, so this isn't everywhere where red squirrels exist, but it just gives us an idea of where they're found. And you know, there's we have some big kind of strong populations, but again, we have lots of little fragmented populations across the country that are more at risk. But yeah, it's not a bad story, and our red squirrels are definitely increasing and recovering. Now, obviously, they're still very much at risk, but for the minute, they're doing okay, which is great. Now, this is our grey squirrel, so this gives us an idea of that. One of the things I'll just get you to notice here is Fermanagh, and Fermanagh is actually technically grey squirrel free. Now, the odd one will still pop up there, but this is great for us, and in all those years of surveying, we haven't got a grey squirrel in there for a number of years, and grey squirrels used to be quite abundant in Fermanagh, and this is really down the pine marten in this part of the world, really, from what we can see. So we have a really healthy population of red squirrels and a really healthy population of pine marten here, which is really interesting. Now, all around Lough Neagh, we tried to fill in some of our survey gaps there. You can see a lot of greys have popped up, but still, I think we weren't able to survey some of these areas because of COVID, but we think there's greys all around here, basically, as well. Again, really in our kind of urban towns and cities and things, and you know, Londonderry and Belfast and Bangor and places like that, we still have quite big populations of greys. Now, this is our pine marten map, and it's quite interesting in that pine marten's probably one of the most abundant, or well, the most ones that popped up the most in our survey, basically. So our pine martens are really doing very, very well, and yeah, you can see here they kind of cover a lot of the country now, and they are having a positive impact. But we do also have to remember that, you know, pine marten recovery, some conflict comes with that, and they also could possibly pose a risk to our small fragmented populations of reds. But for the most part, they're doing their job, and you know, having a positive impact on our red squirrels so far. But again, we just have to keep an eye on this, and there's a little bit of conflict resolution, things to do with landowners, things that aren't happy with them, and yeah, so that's kind of ongoing. So it's just interesting to see is how martens increase more and more, what challenges, what rewards we'll get, but also what challenges they'll have. But yeah, popping up everywhere. This is just a little video we managed to get. This is on a small island in the middle of Loch Erne in Fermanagh, out the west of the country. And here was a pine marten appeared on the feeder. There we go, everything's up. So that was nice. But again, yeah, popping up all over the place. And this was just one of the photos we liked from the survey. I might have shown this before, but it's just interesting for us to kind of to show that we've 2 pine martens there on the feeder, and there's a red squirrel in the background. So these two can coexist in areas where the habitat's right, and a lot of forest cover, and a healthy population of reds, then they can both do well together. And this was just pop this thing. This is one of the favourite ones that came out of our survey, and this was in our nature reserve in Streakillion. This is a camera trap image actually, but it's just lovely showing this little red in the bluebells. And this is in our nature reserve up in the Glens of Antrim. So what are we doing now? So basically we have been working on a red squirrel strategy for Northern Ireland. So that's been last year and this year. That's been a huge big part of our work. So we really want to look at what are our priorities in Northern Ireland as a whole for this species. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. And we've also did a bit of a nature recovery network for the species. So we worked with Dr. Josh Twining on that. And that kind of looks at how we can kind of increase woodland cover, or what we need to do in the country for red squirrels basically. But it's a bit of a challenge in that, I suppose, if you're creating a nature recovery network for reds, it also maybe increases the areas where greys can move. So that's something we have to take into consideration. But it was interesting looking at it for a single species, and that will be part of the strategy when we launch it. We are continuing to do our Lantra training for grey squirrel control. So we do that with a lot of the volunteer groups, and we'll be doing that over the winter here. We'll continue to monitor our population. So we've moved that now to every other year. So we didn't survey 2021, so we did 2020, and we'll be doing the whole thing again next year, so every other year now. And as I said, try and increase our pine marten awareness and conflict resolution. And the other thing we'll be working on is that we've got funding there to work on a new database for our sightings and our control effort. So we really want to make that a bit better, and so we've got funding. We'll be doing that over the winter time, so that will be really, really useful to look at our control effort across Northern Ireland. We want to get back to this. We've all kind of missed this from COVID. It seems strange looking at these photos. These were all before COVID, of events and awareness raising and knowledge sharing and all the things we used to do that were fun. So yeah, we really hope to get back at this when we have more staff and when we can get out and do these kinds of things. So we are actually running a red squirrel walk tomorrow, which will be the kind of one of the first kind of events we've done in a while in person. So that will be great. This is just like, this map is slightly old now, it needs redone, but this gives you an idea of the red squirrel community groups across Northern Ireland. And to me, it's just amazing to see how many people are dedicated to red squirrels, and this is all done in volunteer time. And there's so much of the work that's done on the ground, it's all done by volunteers, and it couldn't be done by staff because we just don't have any at the minute, and we don't have the funding and things at the minute. So it's just really, really great. And the same as kind of Mel said, in Scotland, some of these are self-sufficient, some of them are newer, and I saw in the comments there someone is hopefully setting up a new group, so please get in touch with me and we'll see how we can support you in that. So we continue to kind of work with these groups and support them. But we also have a new one up here. This was really good news for us up in Benevena. So a new population of red squirrels was discovered up there, and there's a new group being set up. So that's really, really positive for us. Just a little bit about the strategy. And this is basically just our main kind of rough aims of what we want. And we are looking at you know, how we can move forward and how people in certain areas, if they want to create their own project or funding to move forward with this. But what we really want is obviously to maintain our red squirrel populations. We also want to support red squirrel recovery, so across former range and in new places across the country. Then we are still working towards removal of grey squirrels by both human control and pine marten recovery. So that's two things we're working on. And then, of course, appropriate habitat management to aid red squirrel conservation. So those are the main kind of aims of what we want. I just want to show you these maps here. Now, this is part of the Nature Recovery Network that we did with Dr. Josh Twining, and this basically shows functional connectivity across the country. I'm not going to try and explain all the modelling and everything for you, but it kind of just shows us how our red squirrels and grey squirrels move and why they're maybe in certain places and why they're not. So in obviously our areas where we have good population of reds, we can see that there's kind of good movement, and obviously, you know, more woodland cover and places for them to move there and good hedgerows and things. And we can kind of see some areas where there's not good connectivity. So areas like this down here and kind of mid and south down, and places where we haven't had red squirrels before and we kind of wondered why. But it's interesting to see, and this kind of will work towards, this will help us in kind of making decisions if we're thinking, you know, how do we try and join up these populations of reds and show us where, you know, we kind of need to stop grades from moving and that kind of thing. So this was really interesting. This will be part of our strategy when we launch it. And then the other thing is basically just our priorities. So this hasn't been published yet, so don't share it yet, but this it will be part of our strategy, and it could change slightly. But this is to get an idea of our kind of where our red squirrel strongholds are in the country, where we think future strongholds could be, and then our grey squirrel control priorities. So some of the ones in green are basically our kind of initial immediate priorities. So those are the ones that are protecting and affecting our small grey populations or small red populations. And then our priority twos are these big source populations. We've got these huge big source populations that are moving through, you know, kind of feeding into the rest of the country. So that's basically a huge, much bigger issue, and would take a lot of funding and a lot of work with councils and things. We have some of them on board already, but you know, that's another problem to tackle. So this kind of just gives us an idea of where we want to work, and if people want to, you know, start projects and things, where the priorities lie. And also we've included in there cross-border work, because we can't really look at Northern Ireland without looking at Ireland as a whole. You know, we have a lot of issues of, you know, from Donegal and the Derry there, of grey squirrels going across. So we really need to include some cross-border work in what we do here, because it has big impact on our species. So that's really me. That was kind of short and sweet, a bit about what we're doing, and yeah, happy to answer some questions after.
That's great. Thanks very much, Katie. Really interesting to see the evolving relationship between red and grey squirrels and pine martens in Northern Ireland. Great. So we move on to Steve, who seems very ready. Thanks very much, Steve.
Good. I hope so. We'll see. Now, is that, can you see that? Is that sharing?
Yeah, it is.
Let me start the presentation.
Yeah, that looks great.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me this morning, Kay. It's great to be with everybody. My name's Steve Trotter, and by day I'm the Chief Executive of the Cumbria Wildlife Trust, and by night I'm also one of the trustees of the Red Squirrel Survival Trust, and chair the UK Squirrel Accord Red Squirrel subgroup. So that's kind of a bit of my background. And I'm, excuse me, this morning I'm just simply going to be reporting the hard work of other people. up and down the country, up and down England, and their superb achievements, which I'm hoping to celebrate. And that includes thousands of volunteers and 10 or 20 professional staff working on red squirrels in England at the moment. And there really is a huge amount of activity going on across England at the moment. And apologies in advance for any projects or individuals I don't mention, or if I don't cover anybody's stories and news adequately. This is only a short slot, so this is a selection and not an exhaustive list of activity, I'm afraid. And I'd like to cover 4 key areas, really. First is to give a quick update on conservation activity across England, talk a bit about the UK Squirrel Accord, quick update on the Fertility Control project, and a bit of news from the Red Squirrel Survival Trust as well. So hopefully I can cover all of those things. So kicking off with conservation activity, I'm going to focus in on 3 areas. So starting down in the Isle of Wight, we're going to move northwards. So I first of all wanted to share my thoughts on the fact that the White Squirrel Project has been actively working for red squirrels for many decades now, focusing on non-invasive monitoring, working with woodland owners, caring for sick and injured red squirrels, etc. And this is the most recent set of published results from the annual Isle of Wight squirrel count late last year. So relatively good situation with around an estimated 3,500 squirrels or so in the Isle of Wight, which is a dream for many of us elsewhere in England, in around about 3,500 hectares of woodland. And the group last year recorded only about 120 deaths. Obviously, it's very difficult to pick up all deaths in an area, but this I found fascinating. I thought I'd share it with everybody. This comes from the group's website, and the report, which obviously is showing the causes of known deaths on the island, which illustrates the importance of roadkill and road casualties, which kind of reminds me of things we were talking about last year in terms of squirrel bridges. But fascinatingly, a lot of people have been talking about the evidence of impacts of COVID on wildlife and pros and some of the benefits and some of the negative side of things. The data here from March through to May, June illustrates that through the first lockdown, the lower traffic levels had a really positive impact on fewer red squirrel casualties on the road. So that's a good news story. It's very hard actually to get quantitative evidence of the impact of COVID. There's lots of anecdote, but this is actual, I would say, evidence. And the August dip is obviously when the squirrels are feeding in the trees and shrubs and not coming down to the road. So some fascinating results coming from the Isle of Wight. But probably most importantly, most significantly, I just wanted to mention and flag up to everybody this amazing publication that's partway through being published on the website of the White Squirrel Project, written by Helen Butler, who's been involved in squirrel conservation on the island for 30 years or so. And this is the kind of culmination of the knowledge and insights that she's gained and the group has gained from 30 years of conservation work on the Isle of Wight. So I really recommend it. Download it. The first 2 parts are available for download. And I gather it's going to extend to about 500 pages eventually, but please do have a look at that, because it's just an amazing achievement by Helen and the group, and just illustrates the amazing dedication and hard work that they put into squirrels on the Isle of Wight over the last 30, 40 years. And what's amazing for me is that it describes life with red squirrels on an island where their populations are still intact, and very much as the rest of Great Britain once was pre-1870. So really interesting to see what it's like to live with a proper population of intact red squirrels, and it provides a vision really for what the rest of the mainland could look like if we are successful in time. So moving northwards up to Merseyside, and this is obviously the well-known population focused on the coast around Formby, but not entirely so. And here are the maps from last year's last September, October squirrel surveys. These are the standardized monitoring results. So you're still seeing, success in maintaining the distribution and range of squirrels largely, although there's no room for complacency as everywhere on the mainland. This is a precarious situation. If you then look at red squirrel reports from all sources. This includes public sightings. You can see that's the kind of general pattern of distribution across Lancashire. And Lancashire Wildlife Trust have been able to collate this index of red squirrel populations on the actual core reserve at Formby, and you can see the kind of variations in numbers over the years. Some of this could be natural variation due to food, weather, all that kind of thing, but much of it is being driven by squirrel pox virus outbreaks. And sadly, there was another outbreak again this last summer, although because of the impacts of COVID, the Max the sniffer dog and Rachel Cripps have done an amazing job of being able to identify the outbreak and follow it, which is, as I say, just been really, really awful. But Dave Everest from the Animal and Plant Health Agency and Heinz Trout from Red Squirrels Northern England have produced this map of confirmed outbreaks that have taken place since 1980, right the way through, I think, to this year. So you can kind of see the distribution of squirrel pox outbreaks and how important an issue it is for us to address and be aware of in our efforts to conserve the red squirrel in England. Pretty gloomy looking map, I'm afraid. But the other really exciting thing that's happening in the Merseyside area is the establishment of Reclaiming Reds, based around Knowsley. And this is a 2-year National Lottery Territory Fund funded project, so it's a bit of a mouthful, which aims to pave the way for red squirrels to thrive once again on the Knowsley estate and in surrounding areas. So this is a 2-stranded community engagement programme, which will give the opportunity for a whole range of people to get involved with the project, from basic learning opportunities through to an extensive programme of events and workshops, training, and getting more people involved and engaged as volunteers, which is great. The key issue really is that the key focus of the project is to try to establish in the long term a new stronghold of red squirrels in Knowsley Park, which is, you can see my cursor down here. Sadly, there's been a long history of reds on the estate, but sadly the last confirmed sighting was back in 2015. So the plan is to start laying the foundations for a project that enables a low density grey squirrel or grey freeze corridor between Knowsley and the Formby strongholds to allow for dispersal and migration across that area of Lancashire, which is really exciting. And with the eventual vision of creating a stronghold not only on the coast but also inland at Knowsley, and getting the local community on side to re-establish reds and develop a landscape scale approach to red recovery in Lancashire. So that's all really exciting work. And good luck to the project, it's great. Then thirdly, moving on to Northern England. Again, here, huge amount of work by the 25 local red squirrel community groups, many landowners, the NGOs, particularly the Wildlife Trusts, and Red Squirrels Northern England, not least of which is the massive effort to survey and monitor the squirrels across a huge swathe of the north, despite the problems that Mel talked about with COVID. And the exciting news is that Red Squirrels Northern England is releasing the 2021 spring survey results this week. So keep an eye open on their website for the report. But this is the map overlaying the areas of the squirrel group. So as per the newly established squirrel groups over the border in Scotland that Mel was talking about, these are the squirrel groups on the English side of the border, with the overlap obviously in the Berwick group. But I think there are several salient points that come out of the report that's going to be available this week. First is that the occupancy and detection rates of both reds and greys have increased, which is an interesting phenomenon that's positive, certainly from the red side of things. So reflecting the issues that Mel mentioned in Scotland earlier. And also that there's a real standout advantage enjoyed by the red squirrels in the red squirrel stronghold areas, or there seems to be. So although there are issues with the strongholds, and we haven't quite got them right or their management right, there does seem to be a positive relationship between local group efforts and the efforts of RSNE rangers and the outcomes for reds. But as always, throughout this morning, we've heard greys have done well too in the last breeding season, so there's no room for complacency. And I just reiterate, the situation is precarious in Northern England. But the monitoring programme remains an important measure of change, and in the future it's going to be a vital measure of progress. And I just wanted to reiterate what a fantastic and brilliant job local groups do and volunteers do. And they deserve a massive pat on the back in Northern England for all of their work. You know, there's no doubt in my mind that without their efforts, we wouldn't have red squirrels in the north of England. They would have disappeared a long, long time ago. And similar to the Lancashire map, this is all records. So the first map was the robust resilient monitoring programme. This is all records from the public. It's over a 3-year period. Again, it gives a slightly wrong impression that there are more reds than there really are, but it just indicates the range of reds. And contrary to the experience of Scotland, actually, the amount of red squirrel conservation effort has never been greater in the north of England. And these are some of the figures. I'm not going to read them out, but Heinz Trout from RSNE would ask me to point out that, you know, the spring survey, we had 53.2% of site occupancy by reds, 59.9% by greys, but you know, actually it's an indicator that certainly in Cumbria the situation is stable. But as I say, even though much of the work of these surveys is done by volunteers, the actual data crunching and organising these surveys are very time consuming. So RSNE is relaunching its Friends of Red Squirrels in the North programme at the moment, and inviting people to donate to keep the programme going because of the costs that Mel outlined earlier that we're all facing. But a couple of other bits of news. Thanks to RSST, Red Squirrel Survival Trust funding, Red Squirrels Northern England is now launching a new red and grey sighting form and dashboard, an electronic version of this, which is much easier and simpler to use for the public to report sightings. So you can zoom in and out of the results map and get more detail and information about the points which are clickable. So this, I think, has the potential to become a national solution for sightings and local group information and support and data management. So please do contact Heinz Trout at RSNE if you want to know more about it or to adopt it in your area. And there is also going to be a ranger app to enable rangers to report their activities much more easily. And any group wishing to participate, you know, just contact Heinz and he will explain how you can participate. There is a small fund to help groups also acquire the GIS, the mapping software to go with this, so that local groups can analyse the data and easily assess and evaluate what's going on in their patch. So again, talk to Heinz about that. And the last bit of news from RSNE is that the Kickstart placement, somebody called Zakira Wong, who's just started, has been developing a new website for RSNE, and that's going to be launched this week in the next day or two. So keep your eyes open for that one. Other bits of news. First one, just to draw people's attention to the new course, Lantra-based course that British Red Squirrels is launching this week. So this is focused on grey squirrel management, developed by a whole range of different red squirrel experts and from around the UK, and a course will be scheduled this autumn. So if anybody's interested, keep your eyes open for that one being announced. And the other one, not wishing to take any of Craig's thunder in a moment, but I just wanted also to flag up and celebrate this new publication that's been sponsored and part funded by Red Squirrel Survival Trust. This is Saving the Red Squirrel Landscape Scale Recovery, and edited by Craig Shuttleworth, Nicky Robinson and Peter Lertz, which includes, this is my link into the English report, includes 15 case studies from England, but it's a brilliant book that summarises state of play in knowledge, research and practice for landscape scale recovery of red squirrels. And finally, before I move on, I just want to remind people it's not all about dull data and difficult things. And please do follow the Cramlington and District Red Squirrel Group. We're having a lot of fun at the moment with the adventures of CAD, and so it's not all about hard work, dry maps and data. So do get involved and have a bit of fun as well. Okay, let's move on quickly to the UK Squirrel Accord. And I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to some of the work that's been going on behind the scenes with the Accord, and the Red Squirrel subcommittee has been involved. This is, I won't read all the partners out because it's too long, but all of the members are listed on that slide. This is one of 4 groups supporting Kay Hall, the UK coordinator, around squirrel issues, and it takes a kind of an overview of policy, science, practice and delivery. And recent activity has included work on translocation of red squirrels, which there's obviously an important conservation role, and the subcommittee has been working with Natural England to provide some training seminars about when this might be an appropriate tactic and how it can be delivered. And I suspect there's probably more work to be done on that. The group's also been working on developing an England action plan, and more on that will be coming out shortly, I hope. And thirdly, the group has just started helping review the guidance on forestry management for red squirrel conservation. And I know that's a very controversial and fascinating area of activity where there's lots of different views. But that group is going to be trying to pull some of the new thinking together on how forestry and red squirrels can coexist and thrive together. Right, thirdly, I just briefly wanted to update on fertility control and the programme that's currently running, undertaken by the Wildlife Management Centre at the Animal and Plant Health Agency. Now, I'm not closely involved with the science, but I will try and attempt an overview of the 3rd year of research that is just coming to an end at the moment before the next year starts. And just to point out, it is all funded by a combination of funders, but largely through the efforts of the Red Squirrel Survival Trust. It includes some DEFRA funding and also quite a lot of funding from private individuals and major donors, which I'll come on to mention in a moment. But the 3rd year research objectives, which, as I say, are now completing in September, was really focused on doing further modelling of the impact of potential fertility contraceptives, the development of the oral contraceptive, creating a system to monitor the quantity of bait consumed by grey squirrels on visits to bait stations, refining the design of hoppers to minimise uptake by non-target species, and building on the success of working with volunteer groups. So several volunteer groups have helped APHA in designing and developing and testing the deployment system. And so that's been really successful. And thank you to all of the groups that have been working with the scientists on this, and it will involve further work in the field in the future. I think I'm right in saying that the modelling results show that under certain circumstances, the fertility control looks very promising and could achieve the same effect within the same timescales as continuous culling alone, but with substantially lower costs and effort. But as I say, further work is underway on that. But I just wanted to show some slides that come from a presentation by the National Wildlife Management Centre team, so particularly Sarah and Giovanna, and about the testing of hoppers and grey squirrel bait uptake to maximise the proportion of squirrels exposed to the contraceptive which will be fed to them in a bait. And I won't read all this out because it's very long, but essentially the questions that they asked were, will the majority of squirrels eat a contraceptive? And the answer seems to be yes, we can deliver a bait to the majority of grey squirrels in most of our woodlands. Second question, will individual squirrels eat enough contraceptive to have an impact on their fertility? And the conclusion again is that we can deliver multiple doses of a contraceptive to the majority of grey squirrels in the wood. Clearly, you can see by the way these are phrased, there's a bit more work to be done on them to test them. But it's looking good, looking positive. And the third one is, can we prevent other animals from accessing the contraceptives by unintended mechanisms? And again, the conclusion here is that we can exclude common species of UK wildlife whilst allowing grey squirrels access to the bait through the design of the hoppers. So lots of work to do, but it's all looking quite promising. And lastly, before I conclude, I just wanted to mention a couple of initiatives that the Red Squirrel Survival Trust are undertaking at the moment. And the first of those is really, oh, what's happened there? To help with the promotion of and deeper understanding of red squirrel issues and getting the messages out to a wider audience. So RSST is collaborating with a YouTuber, Danny Connor Wild, who's a young British zoologist and wildlife photographer, to try and help raise awareness of British red squirrels on various digital platforms. And she's gained huge viral social media success with her red squirrel documentary film. So the idea is that we expand that and help work with her to really get messages out there to new audiences about red squirrels and the importance of their conservation. So the first film with Danny is going to go out on social media tonight, I think it is, at 6 o'clock. And this is the first of a series that will be filmed around the UK to highlight all aspects of red squirrel conservation. And really exciting stuff. So, hoping to reach a far wider audience, not just old fogies like myself, but to new generations of people that we know will care about red squirrels when they know about them. Second point I was going to make, I've just updated, hopefully, on the 5-year fertility control research project. RSST has been doing a lot of the fundraising for the research, and as we go into year 4 of the project, something like £900,000 has been raised for fertility control research in total, which is absolutely amazing and a huge achievement for the trust. The overall target, though, is about £1 million, just over £1 million. So if anybody would like to help promote the fundraising campaign or donate or find out more information, please do have a look at the UK Squirrel Accord website and or the RSST website. So there's more information there available to you. And then finally, this is I promised final bit of slides, is the trust is organising the Volunteer of the Year award this year. And the aim is to recognise, celebrate and thank key individuals for their commitment and dedication to red squirrel conservation. And the trust is really excited that through the nominations, we're going to hear more about the inspiring volunteers and their achievements around the country, around the UK rather. And I just wanted to plug this because nominations close on the 30th of September. So please do rush your nominations into Mark Henderson at our RSST, and we can get those into the judging panel who will identify who the award goes to this year. So please do participate in that. And that, I think, brings me to my conclusion. So thank you very much indeed for listening, and back to you, Kay. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Steve. The new recording software looks like it'd be really helpful. Also, thanks for raising the subject of our grey squirrel fertility control research. As Steve said, the project is going really well. We're starting year 4 of the research through the Animal and Plant Health Agency. The 5-year project is being funded by the UK Squirrel Accord Partnership and generous supporters. And I just want to echo Steve's thanks to everyone that's donated so far. We just simply wouldn't be able to do this without you. As Steve said, we've raised around 900,000 of the 1 million target, which is absolutely fantastic, so thank you. And if anyone watching would like to join us on this exciting journey to develop a novel technique for grey squirrel management, either as a donor or simply to find out more information, then do visit our website, www.squirrelaccord.uk, and we will aim to hold another update webinar to share the research achievements of the fertility control work over the next few months. Great, so I'll now pass on to Craig, our final presenter from Wales, who wears many hats, don't you, Craig?
I do. Thanks, Kay. Thanks for the invite. I want to spin through conservation work that's going on in North Wales and what we're doing at the moment on Anglesey, which is basically chasing grey squirrels around. The first project to mention is Cocklainog Forest in the northeast. It was once the stronghold of red squirrels. It used to be the premier location in Wales to find this species. But for one reason or another, populations have declined. Grey squirrels have not read the script. They're able to use the forest in a way in which we weren't able to predict, 15, 20 years ago. Red squirrel is still present in some localities, but numbers are so small that volunteers and Natural Resources Wales put together a program of recovery, which has included translocation. So this is a reinforcement translocation using largely captive bred, but some wild animals which have been removed from under license from elsewhere in Wales. What's really interesting about it is that the challenges that they face, obviously squirrel pox is the big concern if you've got the two species together. But they've found it's actually predation risk. They've had some interactions between pine marten and red squirrel during the translocation, early translocation phases when animals were housed in enclosures. That wasn't expected because martens were when the planning stage was undertaken. Martens hadn't been released in mid Wales, so it wasn't something that was factored in particularly. However, they were able to work through it. The bigger risk, and which we knew at the beginning, came true, and that was adenovirus. And I noticed when I went through the list of participants on this call, we've got some of the guys from captive breeding institutions across the UK, and they'll be more than familiar with the impact of this particular virus. It's challenging because it doesn't show any clinical symptoms that you could really reliably pick up on by just observing the animals. Sometimes they show enteric, external enteric symptoms like diarrhea, but very often they don't show any. And so one of the challenges that we had, and one of the successes that we've had from the work across Wales, is the development of this non-invasive test, this hair assay. So basically taking hair samples from animals and then testing the hair sample for adenovirus DNA. And you can also run it for squirrel pox. And when we compared animals that were known to have died from adenovirus, so these are animals submitted for gross post-mortem, we compare the positive result against a hair sample taken from them. The match-up is 90% plus, so it's pretty reliable. So Caeclinog's ongoing series of translocations, they've just done a new 5-year plan for the forest, which is looking at management of squirrels, management of stands, and also how volunteers can maximize their efforts within the forest. So this is really about tightening up dialogue and communication. And it's a good example, it's an exemplar really of private sector, public sector, and volunteers all working together. Now, if I talk about Anglesey, the big headline at the moment is what happened over the winter in the mainland Gwynedd, which is separated from Anglesey by Menai Straits. This is a narrow water body, one of the most dangerous water bodies that there is navigationally. Huge tide comes through there twice a day. Red squirrels have crossed over, continue to move back and forwards, almost certainly using the bridges, and have established since 2009. We had squirrel pox virus there in 2017, a couple of cases. The red squirrels still persisted, their distribution didn't really change. In the summer of 2020, during lockdown, I went and pit tagged the population, so mark recapture. And then in September, we had the first squirrel pox case in an animal. We then got Rachel Cripps in, if you've heard her mentioned before, from Lancashire Wildlife Trust, with a conservation dog, Max. And Max discovered the remains of another squirrel. This was in late October. We were still trapping red squirrels at that time, again, pit tagging and looking for any pathological symptoms that they might be showing. We didn't find any. And then we had another case earlier this year on the last day of January. And what we now know is that we've lost between 85 and 90% of that Gwynedd population, which is, although it's continuous with Anglesey, it's effectively managed separately. So it would make up a fourth national population. That's a huge hit. We suffered from access restrictions. We suffered from some of the problems with COVID. One thing that's not been mentioned, it's great to have people out into the forests, monitoring, walking around, telling you what they see. It's bad when they kick fences in, make new paths through private woodland, have fires, let dogs rampage through, intimidate volunteers, steal camera traps. We had all of that going on during the pox outbreak. So this is really interesting, not just from a conservation perspective, but also from a planning perspective, because effectively, a lot of the things that you would have put in place to try and monitor what was going on, we couldn't do. Logistically, we just couldn't. And then in addition to that, we've had this ongoing challenge of grey squirrel in Anglesey. In the last 6 years, we've removed 8 grey squirrels. The last one, we suspect, came out of a camper van parked up for the night in northern Anglesey. That animal took 3 weeks to find. Thanks to the local community and a brilliant volunteer, Howard Foster, we were able to find it. He was absolutely dogged, and we got it in the end. We've sampled all of the animals for squirrel pox. We've also done genetic samples, and working with WIT in the Waterford Institute in the Republic of Ireland, we've got a big study on looking at grey squirrel genetics in North America, so USA, Canada, historically in the UK, and also looking at the island eradication and then the subsequent recolonization. And the preliminary unpublished data really strongly suggests that the animals that we'd analysed, which was 7 of the 8 so far, very much match what you find genetically across the water in Gwynedd. So it's suggesting that there's a strong likelihood that the animals we find on the island have actually come locally, they've dispersed locally. And then lo and behold, a couple of weeks ago, we've got this picture of a grey squirrel in the Menai Straits swimming across, taken by some tourists from the rib ride. And then yesterday, amazing, we have a picture of a grey squirrel washed up on the beach on Anglesey at Llanwyn. So this, talking to my friends who are sailors, if they're suggesting that if an animal went into the Menai Strait between Anglesey and Gwynedd, the tide, depending on the tide, but potentially an outward tide, would take it round that coast into heading west out towards Ireland and deposit it on the beach. So it fits with the tides. And it's interesting because this year, Mel mentioned beach crops in Scotland being high in one particular season. This year, we almost have exactly the same scenario as we faced in 2015 when we found 4 grey squirrels in Anglesey, and that is bumper breeding and relatively poor crops of hardwood seed, particularly oak. So we've got dispersal pressure. How did the squirrels get onto Anglesey? We suspect swimming. We've got a ferry protocol. There's been a suggestion already that a red squirrel has been on an Irish ferry coming into Holyhead. We spoke to the Port Authority. The story was the animal was on the car deck and then ran off into the port area. So if a red squirrel can go onto the ferries, a grey squirrel could easily do the same thing. This is about vigilance, really. And vigilance requires resource, it requires volunteer input, it requires sustainable project management, as Mel's been talking about, the need to have dedicated staff in place to help coordinate and maintain a sustainable effort and degree of data recording. For us, Pine Marten is we see 2 things: gene drive, which hasn't been talked about today, and I won't talk about it particularly, but if you read the book that Steve highlighted, the Saving the Red Squirrels, a nice chapter in there on gene drive and Pine Marten. And we've started to release Pine Marten in Gwynedd. We, thanks to Wildwood in Kent, Welsh Mountain Zoo, and also Jason Palmer and the New Forest, we acquired captive animals and released them last year, and they're amazing. They've done well. We have a male and a female that have set up territories. We've had interactions between two male Pine Martens in the wild. It's really interesting that this despite captive birth and a duration in captivity, these animals do all the things that martens do. They scat the same way on the same prominent places. They use the same types of denning sites, tree den sites in corvid nests and squirrel drays, etc., rocks, hollow trees, etc. And they're very cryptic. We actually have a Pine Marten in the middle of a town, being fed regularly in the garden, 2 gardens. They see it because they know it's there. They put food out for it. They have the cameras, CCTV, and they can watch it. I bet their neighbours don't even know it's there. They're so benign all the issues that that people won't want them, that they'll see them as a threat to poultry, etc. That our experience is the opposite. When we share on social media, people go crazy about it. That there's Marten local, they want to get involved in the project. We've done radio tracking studies, and we need more captive bred animals. We're in a group of interested parties at the moment exploring importation of continental martens. So that could be good, actually, to get around the shortage of martens in captivity, and also the high pressure on Scottish martens from projects that want to take individual animals or groups of animals for translocation. And then I suppose the final thing that I want to talk about just now is the Forestry Act. We've been banging on about this for 2.5 years, getting nowhere really. Although the issue amongst conservation fraternity, the profile's been raised, and therefore that's positive. Actually getting political change has been far harder. We had 2 petitions in England, both of which got to 10,000, and then we got the fob off from the government in their written response. This time, the third time, we decided to do something different, which is to go for a Welsh Senedd petition. And it was amazing. In 6 weeks, we got 10,500. It stormed its way to the top of the petitions list for Wales. On Monday, the petitions committee of the Senedd met and within 90 seconds agreed a debate. All said it was a prominent issue, that they've all recognised was important to discuss. There are some noises from the Welsh government that they recognise this loophole, and it's a major loophole. For those of you that don't know about this, although red squirrels are protected by law, their habitat isn't. And there's no case law when it comes to felling forests with drays and red squirrels in it, i.e. there's no one's ever been prosecuted as far as I'm aware. We had an incident on Anglesey where one of the highest densities of populations was in a woodland, which was then clear felled in the breeding season. The contractor pulled out after there was a storm of press against it. The license ran out. And then despite the license holder actually concealing the fact they had red squirrels from the contractors who they got in to fell the woodland, merrily they put in for another forest tree felling application and now have a second one issued, and they'll go and clear fell the rest of the forest. What we need is, if we're going to support volunteers, and we're going to support volunteers who have to do grey squirrel control and pick up squirrel pox bodies, chasing sightings of grey squirrels on Anglesey, often at their own expense, then we really need to recognise that when they get the dividend of having red squirrels recover and come back, they're going to get annoyed and disheartened if the very woodlands that they see greys removed from and reds back into are then clear felled. So we have an ongoing situation at the moment on Anglesey, as Helen Butler does actually on the Isle of Wight. Forestry is the remit of Natural Resources Wales. They're the regulator, and yet in their own woodlands, they do no monitoring, they pay for no survey, they do no consultation, they don't need a felling license, they can just decide what they want to do as long as they have a live 10-year plan, and they get away with it. And what we need is, first of all, the regulator brought to task so that their political masters stop this. And the second thing is that where private sector needs a license, that the regulator has the power to refuse the license if it's going to adversely affect population at landscape scale or locally, or issue the license and where necessary put in a condition. And this is fully supported by a lot of small scale private sector forestry companies. And the reason for it is because they live by their brand, their reputation is local, and they want to have the benefit of having good environmental credentials. So what a license condition would do is it would enable the regulator to say, okay, you can clear fell or thin or do whatever you want to do, but we'll tell you what you have to do in order to stay within the legal protections afforded to drays and red squirrels, but more than that, to make sure that populations persist. And that means sometimes people aren't going to get what they want. They won't be able to fell. Sometimes they will be restricted in what they can do. But to be honest, if we don't have these restrictions in, then we cannot, it's impossible to manage when timber prices are as high as they are just now. You cannot manage at a landscape scale. And if you're dealing with finite amounts of woodland, often small fragments, vulnerable to grey squirrel incursion or not, those fragments are valuable to red squirrels to persist, to move around the environment. And more than that, actually, we should be thinking about, instead of talking about red squirrel sightings and patterns of sightings and persistence, or geographical landscape persistence, we should be looking at genetics. We should be looking at genetic variation, genetic persistence, genetic management, because what we've been doing collectively in the last 20 years is a blink in the eye in terms of genetic management. We should be looking at genetic management for the next 100 years, 200 years, and putting the steps and taking the steps now in order to safeguard genetic variability. And if you cause populations to decline through grey squirrel, through squirrel pox, or through habitat loss, the end result is the same. The end result is populations of red squirrels that decline and may well bottleneck. Then someone else has got to deal with that later on. I want to give you a little example of this. A translocation that we did 15 years ago onto Holy Island. Probably we shouldn't have done it. In retrospect, we shouldn't. Although it's got a lot of woodland, much more than Mersey Island and other places, Coley Island. Nevertheless, and population reds have persisted. Nevertheless, genetic loss is taking place year on year. With a really nice study done by Bangor University students looking at this. So we have a problem. We have a bottlenecked, isolated population that's now going to require management. And what it screams out is that if that occur there, then if you fragment landscapes, you're going to end up with the same sorts of situation. And genetics is the key for resilience in the face of climatic change and pests and pathogens. And so the change in the Forestry Act would enable the government to be able to do that. So this is taking forestry and integrating forestry into red squirrel conservation and integrating red squirrel conservation back into forestry through legislative change. So if you're interested in this, keep your eye on the Senedd website. There'll be a timetable debate. The debate will be broadcast live. We're priming all the AMs that are supporters of this to go after the minister. What's sad is that the forest regulator's position is basically to try and say that if you don't kill a red squirrel, effectively you can do whatever you want. That's not the case. And in terms of population monitoring, simply having a tick box to say we know that red squirrels were present before we did the operation and a tick box to say they were present after is not good enough in 2021. Given that we've been working together for nearly a quarter of a century, it's very, very interesting that an agency can think they can get away with no consultation on forest plans and then wonder why a project might get slightly annoyed by it, given all the things that they're expecting volunteers to deliver in terms of the Welsh red strategy and the Welsh grey squirrel strategy, both of which say volunteers will deliver this. So if volunteers are going to deliver it, let's not only put the financial resources into supporting projects, giving them continuity, but let's put the legislative change in that's required as the foundation. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you, Kay.
Thanks very much, Craig. It's certainly interesting to see the outcome of the Senedd debate in terms of Wales, but maybe it will affect what happens in other areas of the country as well. Great, so if we can move on to the question and answer session, if everybody can come back on with their videos and their and the sound, that would be great. We've had a few questions in, and I know some people have started to, some of the presenters have started to answer them, which is great. I just wanted to pick one up because I know Mel's kind of answered it in the Q&A, but just to go over it again, which is why during the lockdowns was there a decision made to stop trapping? Essentially, you know, volunteers are often working alone, they're in their own cars, they're in the countryside, they don't meet anybody while they're out. So why did it stop? And I know it'll be a slightly different story for each of the different countries.
Seeing as it seemed to start with something I said.
Yeah.
It was a government decision, basically. And part of it was because we're partners. Our partners are government agencies, Forestry Commission, no, Scottish Forestry it's called now, and Nature Scot. They were part of a sort of an agency organisation that met to decide what the response to COVID should be, and so they were setting the guidance. And so we had to follow it. We really struggled not to, and you know, I've never done so much work in my life in a concentrated space trying to get our staff back out in particular. But Hugh in the chat there had pointed out that you know, once people started asking questions, the thing got resolved really quickly. Somebody asked a question to the Rosanna Cunningham, who was the Environment Minister, and she said, "Oh, but you should be able to go out on your own." You know, that, you know, it became clear that that's not what the government guidance had meant. So a lot of it was delayed a bit unnecessarily. But I suppose at the time, you kind of feel you don't know what risks you're exposing people to. So you know, we had to be sure that we had the right risk assessments in place for all our staff, and then more so in a way for volunteers, because obviously we need to just make sure our advice to volunteers is on the safe side. But yes, for a lot of the lone working, it did seem a travesty, really.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to comment on any of the other countries?
My screen seems to front. Can you hear me? Okay.
We can hear you. Yeah, you have frozen.
I think in England, similar situation in some ways, but I think from a very early stage, lots of local community groups did risk assessments and were able to continue, with the exception of access to some of the big organisations, woodlands. So I know, for example, Forestry Commission weren't allowing volunteer activity on their site, so that all froze and closed down. But otherwise, on other landowners' land, I think things carried on. And as I think I said in my talk, the actual amount of effort was that it was on a record amount of hours and effort invested in conservation last year in the north of England anyway. So it's variable. I think it just depends where you were and who you were working with, really.
Mm.
Yeah, same for us, really. It was dependent on the area, and Forest Service closed a lot of their sites for a while and weren't allowing people access. So it was really, and then we had that travel limit, didn't we? So it was only really if it was near where you lived and it was somewhere you could access, okay, that people could continue control. And then obviously some areas, you know, you're maybe relying on one key person, and then if they're isolating, for example, you know, it's difficult. It's very difficult, but I think people battled through and continued where they could, basically.
Craig, do you want to say anything from Wales, or?
Yeah, we had a contractor in at the time, checked out with direct emailed the Welsh government to make sure what we were doing was all right. And yeah, no problem, as long as it was travel direct to and from work, and the work was outside, and it was necessary. We also argued, and we weren't the only ones, other people argued too, that squirrel pox was an animal welfare disease issue, and with you know, the welfare requirements was that if we stopped, you know, there could be a catastrophe, and so that was accepted too.
Yeah, definitely. And does anyone
We had a lot of trouble getting our staff back on to the Scottish Forestry land, for ages after everybody else was back at work. I mean, that went on for a long time. So they just weren't having other people on the land for a while.
Does anyone think the lack of grey squirrel management during the lockdowns will have had a long-term impact on red squirrel conservation, or the movement of grey squirrels into new areas, or are we catching up any of the lost ground? Anybody?
I think in Scotland there probably are areas of lost ground. You know, particularly where we are unable to work, and we can't work everywhere, which is why we've had to choose these landscapes to work in. Yeah, there probably will be lost ground. We've seen in 2015, when there was a similar kind of grey squirrel boom, a step change in where they'd spread to, and again really in 2020.
I agree. I think it's a big hit. It's going to be hard to get to try and pull it back, and it had a huge impact here on future funding, because our Heritage Lottery projects development phase stopped effectively, and we've got extension after extension, which is necessary in order to put in a good application. But the delay, we've trying to fill that delay, and it's difficult, you know, because you know, trying to raise money in order to keep people to raise money effectively. It's difficult. And with the volunteering, the volunteers do tons, but there is a definite need for continuity with someone coordinating, or people coordinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something, I suppose, that impacted us after the end of RSU, that we did have people paid on the ground to do that, and then that changed when we lost that funding, you know, and we're relying on volunteers, which is, you know, they do such amazing work, but you know, sometimes it's unfair, you know, just to rely on people. They have other things to do in their lives, and you know, it's a difficult one. So really, we need that funding. We saw it work. We saw the model worked when we had someone coordinating that and someone paid on the ground to do it, and we'd love to kind of work towards that in the future again. Great.
Steve, did you want to make any comment from?
I think those comments apply in England as well. The monitoring evidence shows that in some areas there hasn't been an impact, you know, that management has managed to keep on top of things, and it's stable. In other areas, I think it's very likely that there have been inroads made, and the funding impact is a big one, the one that Craig just mentioned. You know, the RSNE, I know Red Squirrels Northern England has been hoping to put in a bid to the lottery for, well, a large project had been just put together just before COVID hit, and it was we weren't able to submit, and since then, that was getting on 2 years ago, so we've had a 2 years delay on continuity of funding, and it's, you know, it gets increasingly difficult to sustain all of the activities and the coordination. As Craig says, it's the kind of continuity of coordination that's really critical. So that's probably been quite a profound impact. It's just too early to say what impact it's going to have perhaps yet, but I think everybody's doing their utmost and working really hard to mitigate and avoid those impacts, but I fear that there could be. And Julie Bailey just makes the point, yeah, Forestry England sites and Forest Commission, that's what I meant before, actually, Forestry England rather, that have denied access to their land for control, for management. So, you know, there's huge risk that Greys have made significant progress in those areas. But I think it's probably too early to know the full impact yet.
Yeah. Bob Cartwright just says our perception at Westmoreland red squirrels is factors other than COVID have had a greater impact. Lack of consistent policies between major organisations, a different appetite to risk, varying degrees of active and financial support to volunteers, and attention to these details, ideally through the Red Squirrel Action Plan, could provide the boost we all need. And we'll certainly be coming out to people more about the action plan soon, won't we, Steve? So
yep, I completely agree with what Bob says.
Yeah. Emma Sheehy just says that she's very keen to learn more about the gene drive and its potential suitability for use in the Aberdeen city eradication. It's very early stages at the moment, still the gene drive, but CON4 hosted a webinar recently with the European Squirrel Initiative, who are the people funding the research, and the Roslin Institute, who are carrying out the research. And that was on the 10th of September. I'm not sure if the webinar is available to rewatch. It might be worth asking, but there are links from the ESI website, the homepage, for further information if you want to read more information about the gene drive, which Craig also mentioned. Somebody said it's been a good year for both squirrel species. There are lots more reds too. John Lee says in Northern Ireland, certainly we've lost lots of ground, but have largely caught up again on their sites, which is fantastic. And I think the others were mainly answered or have been just comments about, you know, positive news about the pine marten recovery. And Emma Sheehy says she's also got pine martens in gardens in Aberdeen, which is fantastic news that they will also go into got people's gardens as well as in woodland areas. But yeah, I think that's it really for the questions. So I think we'll, oh, sorry, unless any of the presenters want to ask any of the other presenters any questions or say anything more. Yeah, sorry.
I wanted to make a comment that pine martens have probably stopped the situation in Scotland being a lot worse than it actually is. You know, because they do seem to be having an impact on the rate of spread of squirrel pox, for instance, from the central lowlands northwards. And I suspect that where they exist in reasonable numbers, they are helping us mop up with the grey squirrels in a way that we couldn't do ourselves. So, yeah, benefiting from that, really, the widespread.
It's just a question to Craig, really. Are you seeing any impacts of pine martens in Wales on red squirrels yet, or are the densities too low still to see any outcomes?
The Mid Wales group haven't said anything about pine martens making dramatic differences. I guess it's the issue is if you've got increased levels of control anyway through volunteers, then you put pine martens in, you might mask any pine marten impact that could have taken place, or all of it. Certainly where we move martens in, what I have noticed is this nonsense about grey squirrels being afraid of pine martens. Clearly they're not, and red squirrels aren't either, because they try and get into pine marten boxes. You know, where pine marten's been living for 2 years, it stinks of martens. It's got the remains of squirrels chewed all across the top of it. So no, it's interesting. I think there's such a huge amount we need to learn more about, and in particular what happens with patterns of vole cycles on marten predation of grey squirrels. Is that going, if voles were high vole year, does that mean that predation on grey squirrels would be reduced, etc., etc.?
Yeah, interesting.
We have had another question come in. In northeast Northumberland from Ian Lakey, we seem to be doing well culling the greys. However, our remaining reds are fragmented. The last red kit I saw was 23rd of October 2020. As Craig said, genetics must be an issue, and we need to look at ways of joining our small red populations. Could there be an advice and support for this? Is there any advice and support out there for linking up populations?
I don't know if there's advice and support. Your local forestry officer will be able to tell you about grants and stuff. I mean, it depends on the landowner's willingness to do it, to connect up. But if they want to have a look at a good project as evidence, have a look at the Isle of Wight jigsaw funding. This might even be 20 years ago. So this was funding specifically to join up woodlands, and I guess it would be in the report that Steve mentioned, written by Helen Butler, because it was a big part of their conservation effort. What I will say, we did a little bit of work with animal plant health, looking at the impacts of disease and mortality on small fragmented populations. We looked at including Havana and Newcastle, and you know, as they get smaller, then these events impact them to a greater extent. If you've only got 4 or 5 breeding females and 2 get squashed on the road, or 2 get adenovirus or whatever, then it's magnified compared with 1 or 2 animals dying from those causes in a population that was, several hundred or 1,000. So I would gather the evidence and then go to the Forestry Commission and others, try and push for them to be creative. I guess the big problem that we've got, same as with the Forestry Act, is that people's hands are bound by red tape. And certainly in Wales with the woodland schemes, the glass deer, landowners hated it because they had to tick so many boxes that they didn't want to tick. They could not, there was no way to have bespoke funding for something like this. Whereas in the past, the distant past, you may well have been able to go and say, this is my idea, can you fund it? Someone says, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll give you the money. That tends not to happen these days.
Can I make 2 observations? I mean, this is a really important question, and vital that we get our heads around it. There are two things coming down the line that might help. I mean, somebody's, I think, mentioned in the chat that there's quite a lot of expansion of forestry going on, which is controversial in some areas in itself, depending on where the trees are going. But two other issues. One, we can't quite reveal what might be in the England action plan, but part of it may be how can we develop better integrated landscape plans to look at specifically at the species the needs of red squirrels as a species, and try to map out across larger landscapes how red squirrel areas connect and how the woodland resource connects. So, pretty much along the lines that Lancashire and Knowsley are doing, Isle of Wight are doing. So that's one option, particularly using some of the GIS tools that we have available now, could be quite a possibility. The second one, and Northumberland has been a pilot, so there's an initiative which is coming through the Environment Act, which hopefully, who knows when it's going to pass, but hopefully will be passed and enacted fairly soon, within the next 12 months or so. And that will require local authorities or the responsible authority to prepare what are called local nature recovery strategies. And they are spatial strategies, and they have to look at the general habitats across an area like Northumberland, but also specifically look at red squirrels, as integrating red squirrels, as Craig was saying before, in decision making at a strategic level, so that we try to make sure that these island effects and connectivity is front and centre of how the government spends its limited amount of money through the environmental land management scheme. So I'm acutely aware I'm probably using quite a bit of jargon there, but basically it's about aligning the funding that government puts into forestry and woodlands with the needs of red squirrels. So I think the immediate answer is, it's probably going to be about talking to the, Northumberland, to RSNE and others. But in the long term, there should be further support and help coming to provide a proper coordinated approach to how we address the genetic issues and the island effects that we have. And of course, some of the forestry community will use the other argument and say, well, actually, we should be isolating red squirrel populations, and that's completely the wrong idea, because by isolating, some of the previous guidance has said, by isolating populations and cutting them off, you're reducing the risk of grey incursion, which I think is a self-defeating argument. So I wouldn't support that. But I'm starting to waffle, so I'll shut up. But that was a really important question that we need to answer and resolve.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Steve. There have been a couple of people saying they're either starting a new group. Kevin Cleese is starting the new Mid-Ulster group, and Leslie Peters is interested in any groups in around Anglesey, which I don't, Angus, which there isn't. If people are interested in getting involved in a group, there are various maps around to show you where the groups in the different countries are. But if people were interested in creating a new group, how should they go about that? Is it getting in touch with yourselves or your organisations to start with, do you think, for a bit of advice?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of Northern Ireland, us and the Northern Ireland Squirrel Forum are 2 people to chat to, but I'm happy to chat to Kevin about that, and there might be some ways, we can usually support in helping them, organise insurance and maybe licenses to work in certain areas, and also things like equipment. We can maybe get people started with some equipment and things, and yeah, or training, lantern training, all those kinds of things are really useful to get the groups up and running. And some of them we support more, and some of them have been going a long time. But yeah, I mean, very, very welcome to starting up a new group, especially in that area. That's a gap, so that would be great for us.
Any advice from you, Mel?
At the moment, yeah, approach the project really if you want to set up a new group. The likelihood is that we will be continuing work in Angus because it's really such a key area, and so yeah, a volunteer group there would definitely help. I'm not sure what help we can offer at this stage because obviously we're coming to the end of our funding and we don't have funding in place for the next phase, but hopefully.
Great.
I think there's certainly a lot of advice out there. There's a wealth of experience amongst the red squirrel community. So my suggestion would be get in touch with somebody who can signpost you to some good people to talk to, because I suspect every group is slightly different. The local circumstances are always different. But whether it in Red Squirrel Survival Trust, Mark Henderson is very keen. I know he's been helping a few new groups set up in England. Red Squirrels Northern England would be keen to help through Heinz Trout, and people on the call today, some of the existing groups like Westmoreland and Penrith and District, Bob and Julie, I'm sure, will be very keen to help, and Northern Red Squirrels, so people like Nick Leeming in Northumberland, lots and lots of supportive people out there. I think people just have to ask, really, and you can be inundated with good advice, perhaps.
Thanks, Steve. And Brendan Anderson just highlighted that to not forget the UK and Ireland Squirrels, the Grey Area group, which covers the whole of the UK and Ireland and is a Facebook group that people can find online. Maybe just one more question before we go. Do the speakers think that COP26 on climate change and the Convention on Biological Diversity COP15 will have implications for red squirrel conservation through protected areas, species conservation, etc.? Or do you think there might not be that much support on the ground? That's from Gwen Maggs.
Do you want me to have a first?
Steve, yeah.
I mean, the honest answer is not sure yet. It's hard to say, isn't it? But it better do. It better have a big impact, because we're facing a wildlife and a climate crisis. And if the international leaders don't grasp the nettle, we're going to be in serious problems. If you look outside the official manicured lines, we're at the moment, our current trajectories are that we're heading for 3 or 4 degrees warming across the planet, and we see every day the depressing stats about wildlife loss. Red squirrels are a part of that, and although they're not internationally threatened at the moment, they're part of a whole suite of actions that we need to take to effectively stop the declines and start turning the graph upwards. We've got to put nature back and put nature back into recovery. So it's absolutely vital they do take actions. Whether they're going to or not, I don't know. I think we need a crystal ball, but if they don't, I think the public and the populations of not only the UK but Europe and the world need to really apply the pressure, because we're running out of time. We've got to do something about it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Yeah, such a big question, isn't it? But I suppose we're kind of finding maybe that climate, it's so important that climate in the forefront, but we need to also not forget the species in that. We're kind of, the government here seems to be looking at climate on a bigger scale and kind of moving away maybe from funding our species work, which is the wrong thing to do, because the two kind of go alongside each other. So we're kind of fighting at the minute. We're in a bit of a partnership with RSPB, National Trust, Woodland Trust, all the organisations, to try and make sure species are kept on the agenda.
Great, thanks, Katie.
I would say we've still got 1967 forestry legislation. That's just screaming out.
Yeah.
We haven't changed that yet. What hope have we got for something like climate change?
Yeah, they're big questions. So I know we're running out of time. Julie Bailey just wants to highlight the Northern Red Squirrels can certainly help with the setting up of new groups, and they've got training trips planned soon for Perth, Dundee and Ireland. So maybe worth going through their website for them. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all our speakers for sharing their time and knowledge today. And thank you to the many staff and volunteers that we haven't seen today, but that we've maybe heard from through the questions, and that work with our speakers and others to protect the future of red squirrels in the UK. Thanks to you all for joining us. I hope you found this as fascinating as I did. If you want to get involved in other Red Squirrel Awareness Week events from many organisations, see the events page of our website, www.squirrelaccord.uk/events, or some of the websites of the organisations you see here today. A recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel shortly, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this Red Squirrel Week. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks to all our presenters, and goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.